everyone, I'm Nita Hone, and it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. This week, we're looking at one of Magic's oldest keyword abilities, Flying. I've done a lot of keywords in the 100 plus MTG Top 10s I've done, including things like Lifelink Vigilance, Indestructible, and more recently, Haste and Prowess. This week, I ran a poll to determine a keyword I would do this time that was one of Magic's oldest keywords, and it was between First Strike and Flying 1. Don't worry though, First Strike fans, I will get around to doing that one day. This list was the most research-intensive list I have done that wasn't covering an entire card type. There are around 2,000 cards with flying, and I had to narrow it down to the 10 that have had the biggest impact on competitive Magic. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have flying, make flying creature tokens, or grant flying to a creature. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score these. Pro Tour, Legacy, and Vintage Championship top 8s are all worth 2 points, and Grand Prix top 8s are worth 1 point. At number 10, we have an enchantment that spits out flying creature tokens, and that is Bitter Blossom. This is an incredibly powerful card, as evidenced by the fact that it was banned in Modern for some time. For a very low cost of 2 mana, you get a flying army. If you play this on turn 2 and your opponent can't kill you quickly, they're just going to lose to your fairy tokens. This makes it especially potent against control decks, because if you're able to resolve this on turn 2, when it's harder for them to have counter magic, especially if you're on the play, they don't have a lot of good ways of combating it. Spot removal is horrible, and even a board sweeper doesn't completely deal with the problem. Helping make this card even more busted in multiple formats is the fact that decks built around Fairy Tribal synergies were fairly commonplace. This included in Block, where it was played exclusively in Fairy decks, in Standard, where it saw play in Fairies and Black-White tokens, and in Extended, where once again it basically only saw play in Fairy decks. It was so dominant that in 2011, after Extended ended and Modern was created, they decided to preemptively ban Bitter Blossom. This ban lasted until 2014, and since then the Blossom has seen a bit of play there in the sideboard of Affinity and Jund decks. Fairy tokens even wreak havoc in Legacy, where it sees play in the sideboard of decks like Show and Tell, Grixis Delver, and Dark Depths. Bitter Blossom is still seeing play at a pretty decent rate, having added 8 points to its score so far in 2018 across 2 different formats. At number 9, we have a creature with a high enough score to get it the number 1 spot on the haste list, but it has to settle for 9 here, at least for now, and that is Glorybringer, which is also the only card on this list still in Standard. A 5-mana 4/4 with flying and haste is great stats, but what really makes this card great is the fact that it can exert itself to do 4 to an opponent's creature. It frequently comes down and kills something right away, and when it doesn't, well, it's just attacking you and putting you in an incredibly bad position because you're on a pretty short clock once this thing starts attacking you. Glorybringer has played a large role in red decks being really strong in Standard right now. It has a home in more controlling decks where it can be a win condition that also happens to be a removal spell, or it can be the top curve for an aggressive deck. It has seen play in basically every deck with red in it since it was printed and legal in Standard, and that includes Temur Energy, Ramunap Red Deck Wins, 4-color Energy, and most recently Red-Black Aggro. It also recently found itself in a Modern Jund deck that managed a top 8 at Grand Prix Madrid, and that could be a portent of more things to come. If it doesn't find a home after it rotates, it will fall off of this list, as cards that are still seeing a lot of play, like Bitter Blossom, Vault Scourge, and Celestial Colonnade, aren't that far behind it. At number 8, we have a creature who leaves behind a bunch of flying creatures when it dies, and that is Hangerback Walker. It is powerful for a few reasons. First, it's flexible. Sometimes the right thing to do is just play it as a 2-mana 1/1, and from there you can pay a single mana turn to slowly pump it. Second, it replaces itself when it dies, making a Thopter token for each +1/+1 counter on it. There's pretty much no good way to deal with Hangerback Walker apart from exiling it. If you kill it any other way, you're dealing with a headache. That last part makes it really insane, the fact that it makes these 1/1 tokens, because it can just sit on the table and gain counters until it's big enough to attack or block, and again, if it dies, suddenly you have a flying army. Hangerback Walker saw a lot of play in Standard since it was basically always insane card advantage. This included artifact-heavy decks like Blue, Red, and Soul Artifact, but for a while there, it was seeing play in just about everything. Jeskai midrange, Selesnya aggro, blue-black control, mono-green ramp, and near the end of its time in Standard, green-white tokens. It was basically a staple for much of its time in Standard because the card had no real board state where it was bad. In Modern, it has seen play in Tron decks, who can cast this huge really quickly, and in Vintage, it has seen play in Ravage or Shops decks, in which case, by the way, it synergizes really well with both Steel Overseer and Arcbound Ravager, since both give you a way to put more +1/+1 counters on it, which means you get more Thopters when it dies. It hasn't had the most active 2018, only managing to get 4 points so far this year, but I think it will continue to consistently increase its score as time goes on. At number 7, we have the first of 2 angels to be on this list. Of course, angels are going to be represented on a flying list, but it's also the first of 2 double-faced cards to make this list, and that is Archangel Avacyn. She was an insanely pushed card for Standard. Between her awesome stats and keyword abilities and the fact that she made your board indestructible for a turn, she already would have been pretty good, but Oh yeah, she can also transform into an even larger creature who damages everything, Avacyn the Purifier. She was a fixture in the standard format over time, slotting into basically any deck that had white in it. There was just no good reason not to run her. This included decks like Collected Company, where she couldn't even be hit by the eponymous instant, but she still made the cut, so that tells you just how strong she was. She also saw play in green-white tokens, Azorius Aggro, and Mardu vehicles. She hasn't seen play since 2017, since she rotated, and has never seen play outside of Standard. Like Glorybringer, if Archangel Avacyn doesn't find a home in a non-rotating format soon, she risks being pushed off the list by cards that are still seeing play. At number 6, we have another card that makes flying creature tokens, and that is Lingering Souls. Lingering Souls has proven itself to be an incredibly powerful card and has seen play across multiple formats over the years. The fact that if you pay both the normal casting cost and flashback, you get 4 1/1 flying tokens for 5 mana is pretty insane. Lingering Souls makes decks relying on spot removal look really bad, as just killing one of these tokens won't accomplish really anything. What's more is it can even be good against board sweepers. It can play both sides, provided you keep it in your graveyard, ready to use the flashback after your opponent is forced to use a board sweeper, and then you can just get a couple more tokens after that. In Standard, it was played in various Delver decks, in Esper Control, and in Reanimator decks, where even if you discarded it or milled it, you still got some nice value. Modern has been the format where it has seen the most success, and in some metagames it has been arguably a format-defining card. It first saw play there in black-white tokens, but moved on to Jund decks, which splashed white just for this powerful sorcery. It also saw play in various incarnations of Birthing Pod before that deck got banned, and when Khans of Tarkir rolled around, Lingering Souls really took off, as Abzan decks became a thing in Modern for the first time, thanks to Siege Rhino. It has recently seen a big boost in Modern, as it has seen play in 2 of the newer decks in the format, various Death's Shadow variants and Mardu Pyromancer, while still seeing play in Abzan. At our most recent Modern Pro Tour, it showed up in 3 of the top 8 decks. In Legacy, it saw some play between 2012 and 2016, primarily in Esper Stoneblade. Overall, Lingering Souls stock seems to be on the rise in Modern, and already has 8 points, all in Modern, so far this year. At number 5, we have our second double-face card, Delver of Secrets. Not a flyer on the front, of course, but it transforms into Insectile Aberration, and obviously that can fly. Delver is one of the best creatures in the game, and in decks that can truly take advantage of it, which run tons of instants and sorceries, and even ways to manipulate the top of the library, it is effectively a 1-mana 3/2 flyer, and that stat line is good enough to make the Delver see play even in Eternal formats. Every single format has had, at one point or another, a deck with Delver in its name, and I'm not sure there is another card in the game's history that can make that claim. In Standard, it saw play in Blue-White Delver, one of the more dominant decks of that format. In Modern, Delver may not be super popular now, but it used to see play in Grixis and Blue-Red Delver. In Legacy, it has found the most success, putting up great numbers in decks like Bug Delver, Grixis Delver, 4-Color Delver, and the various Death's Shadow decks that have recently emerged in the format. In Vintage, it sees play in Blue-Red Delver and Canadian Threshold. You can bet that Delver will continue to climb up this list. It has already added 11 points to its score here in 2018. At number 4, we have the second and final angel to make the list, and that is Restoration Angel. Having excellent stats in Flash is nice, but the real value comes with Restoration Angel from its Enter the Battlefield ability, which can allow you to do a lot of things. You can save a creature from a removal spell, take advantage of a creature's Enter the Battlefield ability, you can even block a creature and exile it so you don't actually lose it. The list goes on. Basically, the Angel is both a win condition and a source of card advantage thanks to her powerful Enter the Battlefield ability. As a result, she has seen play across multiple formats. Like a lot of really dominant cards I've covered over the last couple years in NTG Top 10s, this card was utterly dominant in its block format, as evidenced by the absurd 6 top 8s it got at the Block Pro Tour. This was primarily in Naya decks. It was no slouch in Standard either, seeing play alongside Delver of Secrets, in Reanimator decks, and in various control strategies. In Modern, it saw play in Birthing Pod, where it could help you get another trigger out of your Murderous Redcaps, Eternal Witnesses, and so on, or simply be tutored into play by the pod as a way to save one of your combo pieces from removal. It also saw play in Caw-Blade and in combo decks like Splinter Twin that tended to run Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker, since the two combine together for an infinite combo where you get infinite angel tokens. More recently, it has seen play in Humans and Hate Bear in Modern. At number 3, I've included 2 cards. This is because they are quite similar and would have made the list on their own, with Inkmoth Nexus the legit number 3, and Blinkmoth Nexus, which would have been number 6. Both of them are heavily played creature lands, with Blinkmoth Nexus being the older card all the way back from Darksteel. Both of these Nexus become 1/1 flying creatures. In a world where there were lots of powerful artifact decks and ways to pump artifacts, modular counters and cranial plating being the most popular, Blinkmoth Nexus could quickly be swinging for massive amounts of damage. Blinkmoth Nexus was played in Mirrodin block constructed, showing up primarily in Affinity decks. It saw some play in Standard, though it was somewhat limited because some of the strongest cards with Affinity got banned to weaken the deck, but it still managed top 8s at Worlds in 2004 in both Affinity decks and Goblin decks. Turns out an aggressive creature land like this is good in any aggressive deck, not just an artifact deck. Affinity went on to be quite the powerful deck in Extended and Modern 2, where Affinity has been a Tier 1 deck since the format began, and it continues to be today. Inkmoth Nexus is the newer card, printed when we returned to Mirrodin several years later, and flavor-wise, it represents the actual same place that Blinkmoth Nexus does. However, it's been corrupted by the Phyrexians, and so now it has Infect. It is still a land that turns into a 1/1 artifact creature with flying, but adding Infect has made it arguably more powerful. This means one swing from a Nexus can kill you if you're not careful, if your opponent has Cranial Plating or Arcbound Ravager in play, for example. It also means that in addition to being played in Affinity decks, Infect decks are also playing the Inkmoth Nexus, leading to it having a much higher score than the original one. At number 2, we have the card that I expected to be number 1 on this list, and that is Birds of Paradise. A 0-mana, 0/1 with flying that can tap to add mana of any color, the bird was, for a long time, considered the best mana dork in the game. One could argue today it's probably been surpassed by Deathrite Shaman and maybe even Noble Hierarch, but for almost 2 decades it was the gold standard for a mana dork, and its historical dominance is enough for it to have made several appearances on past MTG top 10s. One could argue that the fact that it has flying isn't really what makes it good, and you'd mostly be right, but there have been plenty of Birds of Paradise equipped with swords of fire and ice and the like, and at times like that, the evasion turns out to be pretty nice. It is one of the few cards in the game that has managed at least one Grand Prix or Pro Tour top 8 every single year since competitive play debuted in 1994, so we don't really want to go into every single deck it has ever been in. It has seen play in many different standard environments thanks to all the reprints, seeing play at Magic's very first competitive tournament ever, Worlds in 1994, where it appeared in 4 of the top 8 deck lists. Its dominance would continue throughout the decades, seeing play in Fires of Yavimaya in opposition decks in the early 2000s, in Fairies and Doran decks in the mid-2000s, and in Kessig Titan decks in the early 2010s. In Modern, it saw play in Birthing Pod. After that deck got banned, it transitioned into Collected Company and Court of Calling decks that were sort of the descendants of that Birthing Pod deck. The bird will continue to see play, and I can't imagine losing its number 2 spot on this list anytime soon, but it is also only 7 points behind our number 1 card on the list, which is Vendilion Clique. A 3-mana 3/1 with flying and flash, Vendilion Clique is the kind of card that is powerful, but not in a super obvious way. I think a new player would look at this and think it was pretty good, but not the best flying creature ever good. Its enter the battlefield ability is flexible, allowing you to either help you get rid of a card in your hand to draw something more useful, or, the more common use for it, cast it during your opponent's upkeep to take away their best card. Letting them draw a card might be a little annoying. Of course, you don't just get to take the card away, because that would be insane. But if you take the best card from their hand, 9 times out of 10 they're going to draw something worse. So you are definitely weakening their hand. This is especially potent against combo decks. On top of the disruption these fairies provide, they also have a pretty efficient body and can end the game in the air without too much help. As a result, the Clique has seen play just about everywhere. This includes alongside Bitter Blossom and the fairy decks of Block, Standard, and Extended, but it has seen play in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage too, primarily in decks that don't care at all about the fairy creature type. In Modern, it's found its way into a ton of different decks. It saw play in Splinter Twin before that deck got banned, as well as in Caw-Blade, various Delver decks, Scapeshift, Blue Moon, Collected Company, and various control decks. In Legacy, it has also seen play in a plethora of decks, including Counterbalance, Stoneblade, Sneak and Show, Canadian Threshold, all the Delver decks, and Miracles. In Vintage, it has seen play in Monastery Mentor decks and Canadian Threshold. Of all the cards on this list, it has had the best 2018, and that is what allowed it to fly over Birds of Paradise, who about 6 months ago would have been number 1. So far in 2018, it has put up 12 points across 3 different formats, and it doesn't look like it will slow down anytime soon. So if I had to guess, I would say it's going to stay at number 1 for a while. Well, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell icon to make sure you get notifications every time I upload a new video. Thanks for watching.